My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm the co-owner and managing director with Impetus Digital. For those people who don't know who Impetus Digital is, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual tools in the Impetus Insight platform for life science companies and healthcare companies to be able to do collaboration. We've been around globally for the last 11 years, and it's unfortunate that it's been COVID-19 that has kind of forced people to do a lot of virtualization of their meetings. We've been helping people with virtual advisory boards, investigator meetings, co-author working groups, and really, quite frankly, recently, brand plannings and all sorts of internal meetings as well. So that's actually what we do. But at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. We believe at Impetus, we're sort of the bridge for those courageous, big, hairy, audacious conversations that are going to take some of the opportunity to bring some of these big ideas, these provocative thoughts, and opportunities into the rest of healthcare. So everything starts with a thought. And that's actually the reason why we started this Fireside Chat, is that we wanted to have some of these provocative discussions and to be the bridge for these for people like, these people that we're seeing right now that are ahead of the curve with MindSet and other things that they're doing in their organization, and sort of sprinkle some of these ideas, not only into Canada, but also as we share this with our global colleagues. So with all of that said, I'm very pleased and honored that we have three very, very successful and innovative and very entrepreneurial physicians around the virtual table today, and I'm just going to introduce them. First of all, we have Dr. Ryan Zarychanski, who is actually a hematologist and he's a critical care physician and a clinician scientist at the University of Manitoba. Now, he's just given us a wonderful Fireside Chat background, so love it. And he has advanced training in epidemiology and the design and conduct of multi-center randomized trials and observational studies. He is the overall project lead for the MindSet data integration project, and we're going to talk a lot more about that today because it's a very exciting area, and the principal investigator for the Traction trial. So this is actually a registry-based RCT that's evaluating tranexamic acid in major non-cardiac surgery. But he's also doing a study in COVID-19, and we're going to want to talk about that. Next, we actually have Dr. Paul Komenda. He is a nephrologist with training and expertise in health administration and economics. So he's a research director of the Chronic Disease Innovation Center in Winnipeg. And he also has considerable experience designing and leading large observational studies using administrative data. So we're going to really want to delve into that because that is also very intriguing for all of us listening. And he is the principal investigator for the Home First Assisted Home Dialysis Demonstration Trial. He might be doing some other things that we're going to want to delve into. And finally, we have Dr. Marshall Pitz. He's actually the medical oncologist and the clinical scientific director of the Research Institute of Oncology and Hematology at Cancer Care Manitoba. He is the Chief Medical Information Officer at Cancer Care Manitoba and is the data lead for their project, MindSet. And he's worked with data experts to lead the development of the integrated data platform, as well as being the principal investigator for the CAPTAIN Cancer Patient Navigation Demonstration Trial. So all of these folks around the table work with the Center for Health Innovation, and this is actually a partnership that's between the University of Manitoba and the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. And it's a center that houses 7 unique platforms. Each of these are staffed with experts and leaders from disciplines in academia and a variety of different practices. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming to the Fireside Chat.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. So let's actually get started. I would love if the three of you could get started a little bit about telling me about some of the latest trials that you're working with. Maybe Ryan, we can start with you. I know that we mentioned the Traction trial, but is there any other trials that you're currently working on right now? We'd love to actually hear what some of that is that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great background you gave and really kind introductions. The three of us work as a team. We started this together and we have different expertise that are completely complementary. And I think we like each other also. and it makes for a great, it's been a great experience. And the truth is we probably learned a lot from each other, and then we feed it back into the mindset machine that we hope will improve the way we deliver our healthcare system, monitor our health environment, and complete clinical trials within Manitoba. We could tell you what we're up to with regard to individual trials. Would it be helpful at all to take one step back? It's up to you as well, and just to describe the MindSet platform and why we decided to journey down this road together to create it?
I think that would be brilliant. And first of all, I'd also like to find out, why did you call it MindSet? And really, you know, I thought I would delve into it through the trials, but maybe more holistically, what is MindSet?
Sure. Guys, do you want to take it? Do you want me to take it? I mean, I don't want to,
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan. Yeah.
We really do function well as a team together. And so it's just,
We just say yes to Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that was true. And so, you know, Manitoba is a relatively small province in the middle of Canada that has a really rich connected series of administrative data. In fact, I think we could say that we led the world in connecting administrative data with the fidelity that we did. I mean, we could follow someone from their birth to their death using administrative data, which is different than clinical data that's generated on a very different scale that is unique and individual to a patient, where administrative data could be about at a population level. Where did one goes to school? You know, did they utilize the healthcare system in a certain way? Were populations or groups of people diagnosed with a certain condition, and how were their outcomes? And that is really effective for monitoring a population, for making disease associations. But where it falls down is that, and not doesn't fall down, but where a clear need and a gap is in connecting our rich clinical data sets. So when you go to the hospital or doctor's office, you know, they'll take lab work and you'll have lab data generated. They may take an X-ray or a CT scan and you'll have diagnostic imaging data generated. You might get admitted to the hospital, of which there'll be a whole bunch of clinical databases that will collect information about you, not collecting information, Big Brother, but that are used to run the healthcare system. What drugs did you get? Did you get transfused blood or not? Did you go for surgery? And what surgery did you have? And that's generated very quickly. And those data sets are very disconnected. They're extremely high fidelity and rich, and they're really not leveraged in a cohesive, coherent way that allows us to evaluate return on investment in our healthcare system. If we want to figure out who's in the emergency room today, we link a bunch of databases to find out, well, who's there and where did they go and how do they do? You know, if someone got hit by a bus and we wanted to know how they did, that one person, we could link a whole bunch of databases that way if we wanted to find out groups of people with a condition. But it's an ad hoc basis, and it's really not a very efficient process. And so we could create a provincial data record that help us look after people, so that we can monitor the functioning of our healthcare system, so that we can understand return on investment of our healthcare system, and so we can complete clinical trials. That's another one of my passions, completing clinical trials at a fraction of the cost by linking the clinical data sets we have, so we don't have to generate the data again just for research purposes. We created a real-time integrated clinical data platform that we call MindSet. It's the Manitoba Integrated Data Set. That's where the name came from. And it's not just a bunch of collection of data is how we describe it. It's really changing the way, it's changing our mindset about how we use data in our province to leverage every aspect we can of the healthcare system, so that it's sustainable, so it's there for us when we need it, and so that we're getting the most out of the money we put into it now.
Yeah, lovely. I love the description. Thank you so much for that, Ryan. I'm going to actually open this up. Sorry, Paul, were you going to actually say something?
I just wanted to kind of compliment a little bit what Ryan was saying. Thanks for the great introduction as well. But I think beyond sort of the MindSet data architecture we're setting up, or it's kind of like building a new building with a bunch of different pieces that already exist. it's not just enough to link data sets together, because there's a lot of expertise that goes into interpreting data sets, asking the right questions of the data, extracting the right data elements, interpreting what data elements mean, and then applying that to solve healthcare problems, both on a sort of traditional health outcomes perspective, like how does something make us live longer, or improve blood pressure, improve cancer outcomes, but also very importantly in emerging patient-oriented outcomes. So what's important specifically to patients, because it's not always living longer, and it's not always necessarily the same thing clinicians care about. So we've really incorporated patients as part of our team, which is sort of threads through all the research we do now, which is kind of the contemporary way that we should have been doing research all the time, but we do now. In addition to having people with expertise in other areas like programming, contemporary statistical analyses, designing of clinical trials in a methodologically sound way, being able to incorporate health economics or looking at value for spend in healthcare dollars. So all of these things aren't just a few analysts sitting in a room together, writing code and extracting data sets. There's a lot of nuances. I would suggest the best research questions come from individuals that take care of patients, as well as patients who are taken care of, and then how we design the relevant analysis around these things. You need people who are trained in methodology at academic centers, and you need people who actually make decisions about our healthcare system. So you need people from, in our case, government or payers. The other element I want to really stress is that we don't want to be at all considered ivory tower academics. We're a bunch of people who just are researchers, and we come up with research questions, and it's not really linkable back to frontline clinical care. And again, Marshall and Ryan and I and others involved are physicians. We spend all our time in various disciplines looking after patients. We very much listen to our patients, and they're at the table when it comes to all of these types of things, some of them on this call today. And I think that's really, really important to stress. So when something like, for example, right now COVID hits, you've got a team that's nimble and ready to answer those questions, not a bunch of policymakers, or not that they're very important, they're part of the team, or people who crunch numbers in a room somewhere. You've got frontline clinicians and patients also involved in how best to answer those questions. So MindSet is also partly that. Is that we don't necessarily want to fit into a box. Oh, these guys are researchers, they've got the research database, or they're just like clinicians bumbling around, or a bunch of statisticians in a room. We're really a very truly authentic interdisciplinary team that's really well poised to answer questions about our system.
Fantastic. Marshall, did you have something that you wanted to contribute to that, the MindSet concept as well? It sounds very much like design thinking and systems thinking, but go ahead.
I would agree with that. Yeah, no, I did actually. Thank you. I think one of the other challenges that a lot of clinical researchers experience are barriers, to implementation of their work, whether it's a trial or even an observational study. And certainly as clinicians, there's a lot of barriers for us to try to get a dashboard up that might help with service delivery, or even just to monitor a certain group of patients. And so one of those barriers is technical, and that's one of the primary goals of MindSet. But I think what hasn't really been said is our partnership with government and the rest of the provincial partners that we have are all aligned around streamlining access to data. And so there's a whole new framework for how privacy and information management will be done within the province. And the MindSet platform is really meant to be a big part of that, to help clinicians, researchers, administrators, et cetera, access data in an efficient way.
I love it. It's fascinating, and literally, I'm sure we could talk for days on this, but I have some very specific questions. So let's actually just kind of put us back a little bit prior to MindSet. Many of the provinces are probably finding themselves in the situation in this place as well, which is a myriad of disparate systems, all kind of working, in parallel with each other, and nothing is speaking to each other. And it sounds to me like MindSet is trying to pull this together in a more interoperable way. So one of the questions as we're thinking about people across other provinces who may want to be trying to replicate this model is, why do you think Winnipeg, Manitoba as a province, it was easier to bring this to fruition? And what steps would you suggest to the other provinces for them to take to pull something together like this, going through the usual obstacles of, infrastructure, compliance, and getting something that's operable amidst a myriad of different data sets? Ryan, did you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Many provinces and many countries recognize the need to leverage their electronic data more efficiently, for sure. And there are certain steps within each of the provinces that I'm aware of to create a more integrated data solution. Those have been actioned quite differently, with different amount of success and different amount of challenge. And I think what makes Manitoba unique is that, first of all, we should have a shared vision within the province to use our data efficiently. We have a mandate from our government to integrate the data in ways that will be appropriate for our healthcare system. And we are large enough that we can use the data to leverage it to find solutions to problems, but also small enough that we know who each other is. We don't live in another city that's 200 kilometers away from this city you're in, where they're just as motivated and set up to create their own data platform. And so what I'm saying is that we know each other, we get along, we have all the data in one area. And recently we've created a provincial health authority called Shared Health Manitoba that has been hugely facilitatory in this regard, because it allows us to create a platform at a provincial level, essentially. So it's not a city level, it's not a jurisdictional level, but it's something that on a geopolitical level that captures our entire province. And so for all those reasons, I think we're really well positioned. And we've been talking about this for a long time, but the stars have just aligned in a way where we have a mandate, the right population, the right people in place to make this happen.
So Paul, in your opinion, with all of that said and some of the successes, and I'm sure this is a journey, this is, getting somewhere, it's like kind of the arrival fallacy. It's always, pivoting, learning, experimenting, and just continuing through the process. But, I was just kind of curious from your perspective, what some of the obstacles were initially when you were trying to create basically a data lake, if not a data ocean. What are some of the pushback and some of the change objection that has come up that you have had to sort of, as a team, sort of stick handle?
This is only an hour call, right?
That's
so,
right.
Yeah,
I know we're going to make.
I think it's obvious. It's obvious, Natalie. Just again, to support what Ryan was saying, it's obvious there's going to be lots of perceived and real barriers to getting these things accomplished. I think there's a few elements that we've been able to overcome. Is like Ryan says, not one person is going to succumb. Like Paul's going to be in charge of this, and everyone's going to work for me, and so on. And I think there's maybe a bit of an era effect here amongst certain ages of people that are doing these things. Like Ryan and Marshall and I are ostensibly leading this, but certainly not after it for any individual accolades that we're the owner of this data. This is a resource for Manitobans, and I do think there's an era effect with sort of the mid-career people now versus maybe the generation before us that were more of the common good philosophy. And I think that's even in younger generations even more apparent than it is with us. So first of all, you got to check your ego at the door, because nobody's in charge here. We're doing this for the common good and not for our own individual gain. Second of all, building a really truly multi-stakeholder team. The kind of buzzwords in the business, like engage stakeholders early. Well, we've all tried to take the shortcuts in research, and I think on careers we've all led large projects before. But truly, authentically, this is a grassroots engagement, and this has taken years to accomplish, of engaging real patients that have a voice in this, engaging various technical stakeholders at Shared Health, or our digital health group, that have been very supportive, provided we had the other elements in place, and that is senior sponsorship from highly placed people in government and do want to change and do want to do something different, as well as like a whole host of different key stakeholders within the clinical realm, that whether it's psychiatry or orthopedic surgery or cancer care or clinical trials or chronic disease surveillance and a whole host of different clinical applications, all of those people, and there's a list a mile long now we have of shovel-ready projects that can use this platform, all saying the same thing, as this is a great idea, and it will benefit all of Manitoba ultimately. Engaging with our privacy group at sort of Manitoba Health, and really from a very beginning having them a good understanding of what we're doing, so they can prepare privacy officers, data stewards, patients that are involved in that realm. So there's a ton of, again, meetings and groundwork and socializing this idea and refining it among all of those domains, that now, like, we have resources assigned to all of those different tasks, but again, around the fact that we have a little bit of money behind this and a lot of momentum from a lot of different people. So it is an advantage that it's a small province, but it's often like, kind of check your ego at the door. There's a lot of work to be done by a lot of different people who are all important stakeholders in this. And I think that's kind of the biggest advice I could give others taking on this journey.
I love it. Really, really good points. And I love the idea is everything starts with a thought, and then there's a momentum behind it, and it's sustaining and building that. So Marshall, as we're coming to you, we're thinking, obviously, one of the core benefits of a large, integrated, multi-stakeholder, holistically viewed database like this of health data is for clinical trials. So can you actually speak a little bit to what you see the future of clinical trial development, management, and sharing, if you will? We've heard a lot of things recently of entities like Transcelerate as an example, where there's been a series of pharmaceutical companies that have gotten together to do some COVID-19 vaccine problem solving. We're looking now at these opportunities for globalization at a local level. So can you share with us some of that vision and some of the forecasting, if you will, about what clinical trials will look like with databases like MindSet in the future?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's obviously one of the key ideas that we had going into this. And so please chime in if you'd like to, Ryan and Paul. But just, my perspective is that this has the potential to change things entirely. We know that you get the best data from clinical trials, and yet they're amongst the most expensive things that we do, and they're very time consuming. And there's always a question of, is a center able to accrue? Do they have the right patient population? And will they be able to get the outcomes? And so when looking at the ability to suddenly query the data that is being captured on a day-to-day basis, you can start to think of recruitment for trials. So just from the planning stage, you can look at, what kind of sample size you might get from this population. But you can also actually, specifically when running the trial, look at recruitment, because you can identify individuals or groups of individuals for recruitment. And so I think Ryan's trial is an excellent example of that, and really shows that there's ways that if you have all of the data in one place, you can start to identify the groups that will be on each study arm, for example. I think probably one of the more important things that will come of this, that I think has already been leveraged in some small situations, is that it will be easier to then get the outcomes, to obtain the outcomes. So all of the apparatus that's required to get clinical outcomes, to get the ultimate endpoint verification, to get whatever lab values, et cetera, are required, is essentially entirely manual currently. And so there are teams of people that literally will scour the patient's charts and are constantly finding this information and then entering it, quite literally, physically entering it into an electronic system for the trial study database. And that's essentially not necessary in most cases. So what MindSet really brings, and the vision behind it, is that if you can identify those outcomes, we can identify where the routine clinical care will already capture those outcomes, those variables of interest. And there may be very specific ones that aren't captured in routine clinical care, especially, for example, patient-reported outcomes, which we haven't really talked about much, but MindSet provides that platform for patient-reported outcomes as well. Along with the trial that I'm leading, the Captain trial is a patient-facing application where they will be able to, enter information about how they're doing, about whether some intervention provided a benefit to them. And all of this is going to be integrated and available without having to mail out questionnaires or get someone to kind of get the CT scan results from that, from another town or another scanner somewhere. So ultimately, having it all organized in one place allows us to then essentially export, a research data set that's pre-built based on the parameters that were set out for the trial. So it translates into much faster adjudication, much less expensive clinical trial apparatus, and an ability to be more precise, I think, from the get-go with the patients that are included.
Yeah, so lots of great stuff there that we could probably linger on for a while. I'm just going to pass this to Ryan to ask something specifically still on the clinical trial realm before I start delving into actual using MindSet for basically patient management and other things. But on this trail around clinical studies, we're now in this world now when you're starting to talk about the digitization of this data and creating these data lakes, you're now inviting global interest. So at what point, and potentially not only with researchers, but also with the ability to capture patients from across the globe. So are these parts of the consideration of the MindSets of the world as we pilot this in Manitoba and then potentially this spreads through Canada? Do you see this becoming one centralized database? Is every province going to have their own database? And what does it mean for regionalization and regional management versus whole populations in the future? And I think a corollary to that question is when we were talking about reporting, your experience, because I know you're doing some work in the COVID-19 trial, is around resiliency of endpoints and being able to integrate patients using wearables or other more resilient endpoints so that it's not so location specific. So there's a lot there, but I was just curious about your view on globalization versus regional and more integration of patients being able to pick and choose which clinical trials they're presenting, where the location of that, and how they're going to be entering in their data.
Yeah, there is a lot there for sure. But it's all fantastic. Those are great concepts. I agree with all of them. But sure, we're starting within Manitoba, but that's meant to be a testing ground. It's meant to show what you can do and spread and scale it from there. I see in the not too distant future, we'll have core data sets so predefined data sets within provinces, with countries, with really well-developed streaming mechanisms where you can tell if you're a company like I have this drug or device or therapeutic, what kind of target population's out there. Well, they could find that within a certain province, but they could just link a bunch of data that's streamed to say, well, that's the kind of global population that could be available for my drug or device. Likewise, I might have done a trial as a company or to do the trial. Like these trials that the many industry representatives embark upon financially are astronomical. Like for I just heard that someone got like $21 million to study a calcium channel blocker in COVID-19. We just did a 1,000 patient trial with 812 patients of a randomized trial, just got published this week in a high profile journal. We did it for $100,000. Like if you use the data that's already available, that's linked and electronic, and don't recollect it, you can save over 70% of your expenses for a clinical trial. So I can see companies utilizing this infrastructure to understand market access, to do clinical trials for cheaper, and then to monitor the effect of their drugs or devices in a post-marketing sense, understand they're working and that they're safe at a population level. And this is enormously expensive now, but can be radically more efficiently priced by leveraging the data that already exists electronically. And then you talked about wearables and other ways to participate in trials. Absolutely. I mean, look what's going on now in parts of in Asia, more so, a little bit in the UK, and toying with in Canada about trying to find out who's where by using their cell phone, with regard to contact tracing. Or what about our heart arrhythmias with the watches you're wearing? Not that hydroxychloroquine causes heart arrhythmias, because that data was made up, but to a large extent that was. But I mean, you could probably get all this information from people's devices already. And so there's enormous opportunity.
So I'm going to pass this along to you, Paul, to talk about the issues around current costs. So there's probably a lot of people around this virtual table listening to this from various Canadian pharmaceutical, but probably global as well. And so why is the cost so high right now? And what barriers have been set up, and why doing a clinical study is so difficult for a pharmaceutical company? Why being able to do things like the expected and the mandated real world evidence trials, an example, are so expensive and difficult to navigate? And what steps can a pharmaceutical company take with a group or an organization or a platform like MindSet to be able to make that happen more quickly, more efficiently, and and with a more cost-effective edge to it? So what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's several steps to take. And I think operationally, we're not quite there yet, but we have a very clear vision as to where we want to get to within Manitoba, but also that this will spread, because once we develop something and we show the model that it works in a variety of different use cases, it'll be something that other provinces and jurisdictions won't be able to live without. And to be honest, a lot of the private healthcare insurance providers in the US already do elements of this. So there's leaders of, say, like Kaiser Permanente in California, potentially the VA, places that have these closed data sets within their health systems already that probably do a lot of this business intelligence already. But just as an example, supposing we want to enroll patients in a trial for a new drug X in my area in kidney disease. And we want to know, okay, so are there, patients that are eligible for this new drug and the new trial, depending on inclusion and exclusion criteria and so on. The current process really is, there is a research coordinator that's hired, who's usually a very skilled master's trained person. They will come in and they will screen the charts in my clinic for who may be eligible and so on. And then they may hang around the clinic in case one of them may or may want to participate in a trial. And then enroll the person in the trial, and then collect a lot of manual paper-based data, reams and reams of it, and then take that and enter it into electronic data capture system that's set up by the trial that may cost $500,000 or $1 million to set up. And that's how the trial operates. And then there's people that fly in from other cities to audit all the work they've been doing. And sometimes in our case, we have 2 patients enrolled in a trial. We have a coordinator hired, and people are flying in to audit all this paper on 2 patients, checking that, Ryan initialed some lab requisition. And like this is just, you can just see the manual labor involved in this is immense for very, very little output, right? And so because of that process, and if we shift to the future and we had an integrated data set, and forget just in Manitoba. This is going on, say, for a trial with a relatively rare use case at hundreds of sites internationally, all over the world, and they have this manual process in many cases. Now, fast forward to the future, if I had an integrated data set in a province like Manitoba or Ontario or somewhere in Europe, I could look at the entire, let's say in the UK, the entire NHS data set that was integrated. I could find all of the patients in the system that were eligible for this drug or trial based on their past medical history. I could rule out and rule in patients and inclusion exclusion criteria, find the parameters that may make them eligible. And in fact, in a future state, we would actually potentially even collect information on patients ahead of time saying, hey, would you ever be interested in a research study? So we don't waste a bunch of time contacting patients that'll never want to participate in a trial. And therefore we can distill down very efficiently on a population to say, yeah, you know what, this group, there's this patient population that we can maybe connect with virtually, enroll them in a trial, and then as they get the intervention or the drug, basically check in on their outcomes electronically, and all that can be audited by a second party anywhere in the world. So really, it's better for patients, it's better for the sponsor of the study, it more efficiently enrolls and collects the data just by eliminating a lot of very unnecessary non-value added manual labor right now. Some of that is going to require us to accelerate these latent trends we have around, like, what does privacy actually mean in the digital age? And so that there's conversations that have to occur within patients and governments and privacy officers, and maybe even laws written around that to some extent. And then also it requires a lot of expertise in linking and interpreting data sets and making sure we can get that useful information extracted. But it's not to me, it doesn't seem so far-fetched right now that should be occurring. In fact, I think a lot of patients or people not involved in clinical research would be quite shocked to realize we're not doing some of that already and how inefficient. And this is why trials are so costly, so long to undertake, and really it's that cost is passed on to consumers. So that's why it's also so very important. Another element we haven't discussed was our real openness to work indirectly with industry as partners. And again, not be the ivory tower academics. We're going to do all this in the academic world. Pharma, stay away, because they're truly the people that are bringing medications, devices, and new treatments to market. And without them as partners at the table, we're not going to be able to take as good care of our patients, certainly, or advance medicine.
Yeah, so all really excellent points. And I love especially the way you talked about the integration of patients as part of that holistic framework and the partnerships with manufacturers, government. It sounds like this opportunity for a centralization. So I was actually just curious on that, Marshall, as we're thinking about the new world and what the possibilities are, as we start delving into places that can be considered a little, scary, uncertain, as we start to think about some of the legislation around PMPRB and the way pricing is going to be done in the future, centralized potential pharmacare programs. Is there an opportunity to centralize data lakes where we're now, can we actually make this a positive thing as opposed to a negative? Bringing the various provinces together and data sharing so that research can be done in a more holistic, sort of systematic way, for it easier to manage patients across boundaries and across geographical barriers. Can we include, pharmaceutical manufacturers and other key stakeholders as part of that equation so that they could also be part of that ecosystem, so that drug development, drug inception, drug delivery can be done in a much more holistic way. So what is the hope for the future as we delve into this centralization and globalization very, with uncertainty? Can there be something good about that?
Sorry, I just missed your last statement. I think I locked up just for a second.
Oh yeah, no worries. So I guess with just being a little bit fearful of this more centralization,
sure,
can there be something good about that as we look at the possibilities of how that could work?
Definitely. So I think it's having the data in an organized fashion, the way that we are approaching it, really will facilitate that. So right now, a lot of the barriers, as I'm sure everyone knows, is the legislation around how data is shared because of, in particular, privacy. And so there are methods where data does not actually have to leave, a province, but can still be analyzed in a way across jurisdictions in a federated model and others. So the first step, though, is really having that data organized. So I'm really hopeful that we will actually be able to. Ryan's trial actually, there is a component that is meant to test this in one way, where we're using some data from another province will be tested essentially to see. The challenges around that are making sure that you have a common language for the data, and so that really takes I think large interprovincial collaboration to ensure that people are using the right, or not the right, but the same language and data model, or that there's at least an ability to make sure it's transformed into the same organizational structure. But the first step is really getting your house in order, and so that's been our approach, is to make sure that we've got the depth of Manitoba's data organized. When it comes to things like getting national pharmacare programs and taking healthcare to kind of a different level, we'll say within the government, I think it's going to be critical for provinces to make sure that they have access to their own information and can compare to ensure that their citizens are getting access to the right medications that they should be. I think as we know, even though the access to healthcare is meant to be universal in Canada, there are provincial differences, and so as those barriers are broken down, I think having access to those data will ensure that patients aren't left behind just because they are in an area that may be underserviced in some way. So having the data accessible, you'll be able to identify who those at-risk populations are that might not otherwise have access.
Yeah.
Just to comment on that a little further around access. I think right now we get maybe propose a new drug or device or treatment or diagnostic test from an industry partner, and they make their spin on how this should be priced, what the need in the market is, and so on. Without a lot of local validation, is this an issue in this province? What's our existing treatment, and so on. So using real-time clinical data allows us to populate local or even jurisdictional, as Marshall says. A difference in the remote rural north of Manitoba is very different than in, say, Winnipeg, for example. It allows us to really say put a local lens with real-time, real data and real risks in order to say what should our province be willing to pay for this new treatment? How is it more effective or safer or better for patients than the way we've been currently doing it, and really have some robust economic models around this. By the same token, having this system set up a priori, a company may have a new treatment, device, drug, test that they're thinking about developing, or thinking about acquiring a smaller company that has this technology. And they want to say, let's do a little test run on the data set ahead of time to say, what's the scope of the problem? What should be the willingness to pay of the province for this new device or drug? How is it going to improve quality of life or outcomes or save money for the system? Like, let's face it, there's no new money in the system. Every person knows that. We have to get more efficient with the money we spend currently. And there's a lot of efficiencies in our system, and there's a lot of new technologies that may be costly that overall will save money, but I don't think enough. We base a lot of decisions maybe on the literature, but not necessarily enough on our local needs and costs, et cetera. And this is, again, speaks to the necessity of the multidisciplinary collaboration that we've established, and I would encourage others to do, of people who are frontline clinicians and specialties, patients, health economists, biostatisticians, epidemiologists, and policymakers. Because right now we're not as evolved in the decision making and analysis as we should be, and this is the really way to drive value for the system.
Yeah, and I think it also really speaks, and I'll just call out to you, Ryan, to speak to this, is the issue around interoperability. And interoperability it's not just the digital component of everything speaking to each other, but it's involving all of these stakeholders in the ecosystem as part of that equation. So as we think about this and maybe step out of the lines of discussion around clinical studies and talk more about patient management and management of health and people who are on certain medications or using certain devices and how we're following them in terms of specific endpoints and health outcomes. So how do we open the doors to that? So there's more visibility, and so that other stakeholders can have the observances to participate in viewing that, potentially opening the discussions to risk sharing and cost sharing as we start talking about insurers coming into this equation, et cetera. Is how do you sort of see this interoperability working in such a way that this, monitoring of patient care, adherence, how are these actual drugs, chemicals, services, devices actually benefiting people? How can we actually enable that moving forward? Your voice.
So the truth is we're not really monitoring it now. When a drug gets approved, it's gone. And it takes usually a health region, but it's usually an investigator as part of an initiated trial to understand, are we really getting the outcome we thought we were going to get from the clinical trial that was done? What's the real world evidence of its use? But also, what's the real safety of it now? I mean, clinical trials are not typically designed to monitor safety at a population level. And so with this kind of system with the MindSet system and with those that could be added on and connected to, you could easily do this where a new device, like maybe a heart failure device, gets approved, starts to be used. But then the immediate question by the company is like, well, who's using it? How many times? You could track sales, but sometimes prescription stuff isn't straightforward. Adherence may not be easily captured. Enter in a module where the patient is tracked, but I'm saying that maybe there's a wearable that could easily identify how well something is being uptaken by a patient. What do people think about this? We don't even know about that too, right? We just, the drug it has a certain side effect profile that we find acceptable with some efficacy data, and it gets used. What do people really think about this? Like, what's the patient outcome? What's the patient experience about taking this drug, using this device, accessing this part of the system? It's not incorporated systematically, but it could be. And then it could be done using validated tools across provinces, across countries, across disease states. And so we could understand really the impact of that medication, drug, or device at a systems level that goes well beyond efficacy, that goes into cost, to patient experience and outcomes, and to overall functioning of the health system.
Very interesting. So one of the things that I think this brings a question to is, there's a couple of key things here that I guess cause a little bit of issue and obstacle. And one of them that Paul has really spoken at great length to is really the issues around data ownership versus what's owned versus what should be shared. What is actually processed information versus what's raw data. And as you all know, in the new world of digital and machine learning and artificial intelligence, data is king. It's the oil. It's what we feed off of it. And so there's a lot of controversy and discussion around this. So just passing this along to you, Marshall, around data privacy and security, what are some of the key factors and people and players that should be around the table? And what would be your hope for releasing this conundrum that we find ourselves in, because we can't even move ahead with interoperability. We can't move ahead with electronic health records or patient portals, or again, all of the seamless electronic transference of data back and forth between patients, between various stakeholders, between researchers, all within these data lakes, without having that free passing of information. So how do we start to uncover or release this conundrum we're in?
Yeah, that's a challenging aspect, because I think you're quite right. One of the major challenges that I seem to live every day is not being able to share data for a purpose that we've already got approval for, or clearly is a clinical need. And it's, I think, as with everything, it changes over time. And so what I think really is required to help systems move towards health systems, provincial systems, governments move towards changes to privacy laws is discussion. I think we need to talk about what the risks and benefits are going to be for using the data in certain ways, what those security aspects are going to actually be. The truth is, we all expect that our phone connects with our laptop or our iPad or whatever device that we've got, and that when I get to the airport, I've got, maybe that's a bad example this time, this current stage, but all of my information is there, and I've already agreed essentially to share that information with my credit card company or the airline or whomever, and all of the different ripple effects that have streamlined how we interact with our world has really been handcuffed in health, because we view that data differently, and so there's already processes and security in place in other markets, but not really within health. I think there's always this concern, but what we aren't really capturing, I think, well, is the risk of not doing that. So current state where we're all working in our own little silos, it's hard to see what the potential advantages, you might dream of what those advantages might be, but we don't think about, if we don't move towards a system that's more integrated, a system that's more able to share data. If I end up, even within Canada, if I end up traveling and need to access a hospital, it is literally faxed records that need to come from, my doctor or the hospital in Manitoba. There is no connectedness. And there's the only reason for that is it's not security, it's privacy legislation and concern, and it's hindering care. So that's what I think it will take. But that is a very long goal, obviously.
Don't you think we just tether the fax machine to our cell phone, Marshall?
We could, actually, we could. And then in fact, I'm just going to bring a fax machine with me next time.
We've designed our system, guys, to the lowest common denominator, most risk-averse individuals, and said that that's status quo and that's a sacred cow that we can't touch. In our health system here, fax seems to be grandfathered as a very secure medium of communication, but we can never email, or we can't put things on secure online platforms. I'm actually very surprised at, I talk to my peer group and my patients. They either just don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other on the way things are, or they're actually very shocked at how many restrictions there are on privacy, theoretically supposed to protect them, but actually doing them significant harm in terms of not being able to access information, or duplicating a lot of tests, or practitioners not being able to collaborate in real time simply because there's so many restrictions. So I would encourage privacy folks for us to have meaningful conversations with a very diverse group of people that are not career bureaucrats in privacy, but patients of different ages, and different, backgrounds and different, expertises to really have a meaningful conversation and not pander to that 1% that are really strict about privacy and so on. And those people could be excluded from the major data sets if you it should be like an opt-in, opt-out versus an opt-in policy that. Because again, I think vast majority of the public would be pretty shocked to know how little we can access now, and would want to have better care as a result.
I'm going to close off this call with a rapid fire. I'm going to each ask, starting with Ryan and Paul, and then Marshall. Just a quick question is, if you had a hope for the new normal post-COVID, for MindSet, for any of this work that we've been talking, legislation changes, regulatory changes, what would be your number one hope moving forward in the new normal? Starting with you, Ryan.
I would hope that the default platform to do business in healthcare is electronic, and that we should, by default, be sharing and leveraging the data instead of developing manual methods for running our system, for measuring our system, and for reporting back on it.
Love it. Paul?
I would completely echo that. I think every resource we spend, new spend right now, should be at fully electronic systems that are interoperable, that talk to each other, and that we have meaningful conversations with the public and with key stakeholders around how to accomplish that and what privacy actually means. And I really do think we need a full revamp of the way we look at privacy of data.
Love it. And Marshall?
So of course I agree with what was said. To me, one of the biggest aspects that I've noticed is we've all embraced change very quickly. And people have changed from this is how I do my work, or this is how we get a new system in place, which is a multi-year, very slow kind of process, to something that can say, there's a requirement that we do this, and we can do it in 2 weeks. We can do it very quickly, and we might not get it perfect, but we'll get it pretty close, and we will accept that we can then iteratively improve it. And in the health system, I've definitely witnessed multiple examples of that, and I really hope that attitude remains.
I love it. This is a really, really important discussion, and obviously can last hours and days. And I think at the end of the day, what we're really talking about here is systemic thinking, systems innovations. And we realize, as you had all alluded, this requires adaptive behavior and evolving thinking. It's going to be the incremental that's going to be required from starting these conversations. Is the whole point of doing these fireside chats so we can start these courageous conversations. It's the whole reason and mission behind Impetus Digital, so that we can create this platform, so that we can start to sustain and build these exponential concepts and ideas, so we can break through some of these regulatory and legal hurdles and start to have some positive conversations about what healthcare data privacy, security, and how can we leverage and communicate more widely. So thank you to our panelists who were on the meeting. Ryan, Paul, and Marshall, you were excellent. We're going to be providing everybody their links to their LinkedIn profile and to the Center of Health Innovation in Winnipeg for anybody who wants to connect and find out more about MindSet, how you can actually partner with their organization. If you're from another province, also to find out how you might be able to replicate some of their success. Please look for the links. We'll be sending an email with access to this recording if you want to share it with any of your colleagues. And we certainly will be posting this on Twitter, YouTube, our podcast, as well as on our website. Thank you all for your attendance today. Wishing you all well, and stay healthy, and we will speak to all of you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah.